So a criticism that I receive often is, why include equity and economic justice in the context of climate? Climate is hard enough to solve on its own. It's a unique and urgent crisis. So why deal with equity at the same time? Can't we deal with it later? Well, I'm Black, so later apparently never comes. Let's put some green in the Green New Deal. So one of the main criticisms that we get with the Green New Deal is that people support our vision on climate, but they think that it's a progressive wish list. It's just a way to smuggle in progressive priorities into what should otherwise be a climate bill. That criticism, though, belies a fundamental misunderstanding of what causes climate change or how to address it. So my response to that criticism is threefold. The first is that climate change impacts certain communities more. People like to talk about climate change killing us all, but the truth is that it's going to kill certain people first. And those are the folks on the margins. These are the same people who live near coal-fired power plants. These are the same people who are living in areas with high levels of air quality violations. So these are the same people who have allowed us to maintain our reliance on fossil fuels so long, and to ask them to pay for the green transition, for that to be built on their backs too, is immoral. The second reason is that income inequity and the climate crisis are deeply linked. There's a growing body of evidence that shows when you have more income inequality, you actually have higher emissions. The third reason is that we need power in order to pass any climate legislation, much less something as big as the G&D. I've spent my life working for low-income communities. And so what I understand really deeply is that folks, particularly working class people of color, do not experience climate change in the very lofty ways that we talk about as degrees of warming or emissions and emissions reductions. They experience it as economic loss, the loss of a home, right, to flooding or fires, the loss of a job because industries have to switch, and on a very personal level, especially when it comes to health. And so for people to really care about climate, we need to be able to talk to them. We need to have legislation that addresses the effects of climate change that they're most worried about. Otherwise, these folks are going to continue to see climate as an elite issue that's somewhere far off that they don't have to deal with. So we have to not only talk about the crisis like it's urgent, we have to create policy that reflects that urgency. We're trying to do something unprecedented. We need new ideas. So how policy is usually made is by some combination of legislative staff, think tanks, lobbyists, and sometimes folks at agencies. They tend to be white, older, and disproportionately they tend to be men. The process tends to be pretty insular. Consultations happen in a limited way. Often they don't happen directly with communities. Those folks are often not involved in conversations. But when you bring them to the table, the ideas change. The solutions on the table change. The considerations change. Because often traditional policy wonks don't know all the things that people in communities know. They don't think very hard about, if you put solar panels on this house, the property value increases. What does that mean for somebody's property taxes, especially if they can barely pay them now? Those issues now become issues that everyone is thinking about and brainstorming about because they are at the table. I have seen this happen, and I have gotten feedback from experts who have worked on energy for their entire life. They have never been at tables like that, and they saw the way that it changed the solutions, and they felt like we came up with better ones. I am Black, right? I deal with the ramifications of my grandfather being cut out of the GI Bill and us having to live in a lower income community. I deal with the effects of my family who were domestic workers in Mississippi being cut out of the New Deal for 15 years before they could deal with Social Security. That is 15 years of wealth that we will never get back. People live with the effects of these policies for generations. And so if we are allowing inequity to continue, we are allowing it to turn into things that are much worse down the line. And so this idea that equity could come later doesn't make any sense. The fact is, we are building an army of people who are committed to working on this and who are collaborating with us every day. The climate breakdown is the result of collective problems, so the solution is also going to be collective. That's when you're gonna come up with good solutions, at least in the policy process. And so what keeps me going is remembering that I'm not in this alone. So AOC tweeted, "The Green New Deal belongs to indigenous communities, it belongs to residents of Flint, it belongs to Puerto Rico, it belongs to the victims of wildfires." So a couple of people responded, "It belongs in the fantasy section next to Chronicles of Narnia." A second reply, "I am a white dude, does it belong to me?" This is the same sort of skirmishes we always have over questions like this. Just because she's saying that the Green New Deal belongs to those folks, it's because we treat those folks as though they're not part of the conversation. Whenever you say, hey, a marginalized community should be at the center, someone always says, well, what about white people? As though white people haven't been at the center of the history of this nation for, I don't know, the whole time.